Well, maybe it's time for us to get started. My name is Scott Lange, proud to be president of Visionary Philanthropic Consulting, and delighted that you're able to join us this afternoon. It's a lovely hot August in Naples, Florida, but I understand that other parts of the country are challenging us on the heat ratio as well. So maybe that's not as novel for many of you. I'm delighted to be joined by my former colleague at MedStar Health, Francisco Semio. We served together in the philanthropy department there. He was focused on corporate and foundation relations and did a stellar job. In recent years, he migrated over to the Department of Government Affairs, where he essentially manages, I'll call it, all things related to government grants, contracts, relationships, etc., at the federal, state, and municipal, the DC level. Francisco, I'm proud to say, is also a consultant with a firm, basically handles our international work, fluently speaking Portuguese and Spanish, and has helped on a variety of projects. So let me turn things over to Francisco and let everyone know that I believe we've got the Q&A feature enabled. So we'll take your questions during the course of the session, and then we'll, at the end, address those in real time. But thank you, Francisco, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Scott. One thing I'll add that making the case or making a case has been a constant even during my current tour in the past 6 years in my current role, because I work with regulatory proposals which are very intense applications that have a narrative and a budget section, justification sections that include market research, quantifications, and then you have to make the case for an approval. So you're not getting money with these, but you get an approval so that your project can advance. But then also you also have quarterly reports, which include financial reports and closeout reports, just like grants do. So I would say that you never stop learning. There's always something you learn how to make these packages even better. So hopefully, when I go back full time to philanthropy, I think I'll have some additional experience to enhance my offerings to my next employer. So thank you, Scott, for thinking of me. I think that this is a topic that's close to my heart, because I think people see definitely the world of grants a little differently, and hopefully some of the things I've learned over the years will be of use to those who are on today's webinar. Now, if we can advance to the first slide. So today we're going to cover these areas. They may seem very simple, but I think even though they are rudimentary, and I think a lot of people can say, "Oh, I already know about this stuff," but some of these simple, fundamental topics, I think there are things in there that we all can learn about. Certain, pet peeves I've had over the years that can enhance your processes and make your work in this world of corporate foundation, even government grants, enhance what you're doing and also improve your chances. One of the things I like to throw out there, and I hope that the streak will continue at some point, during the 15 years that I did grants in one way or another, either being a program manager, project director, senior director for corporate and foundation relations, it did allow me to have about a 70% average acceptance rate. So I know that that's a little above average. So I'm very proud of that record. So if you can advance to the next. So why apply for grants? And foundations, corporations, and government entities. If you could advance to the next slide. One of the things that I can tell you is that I definitely consider myself have been in the field in philanthropy that was a little easier in some ways than my other colleagues, the major gift officers. I really respected them. I was very lucky to being in teams that we did a lot of cross training. And but you know, even though I had some training as a major gift officer and did spend a couple of years in that role to learn that side, I think that was very beneficial. I see them as cold callers, and that challenge, even in healthcare with grateful patients, you're reaching out to people that are in your circle as patients for your health institution, or even with alumni with universities. There is that, at least that, some connection, but in some ways you're kind of giving them a cold call. Whereas in the world of corporations, foundations, and government grants, they're expecting your call. They're in the business of giving money away, and as you can see over the years, from 82 to last year, even though we've had economic challenges and turns down, the money, the opportunities, the giving, it keeps on going up over the years. So I would say the only thing that really has changed is demand. So there's more competition. So that's one thing that has changed. I would say that makes it more challenging. More money, but less to go around because there are more people. And if you look at the rate of the incorporations of nonprofits in the United States, there are more and more get added to the pool every year. So why should you apply for grants if you have an organization, a nonprofit, and you meet the criteria? Well, grants do allow your organization to grow. And just like your investment portfolios, you need to diversify your revenue streams. And a lot of entities that are out there, they have fundraising programs where they do online annual giving, appeals, and they have enough experience or the right team, they delve into the area of major gift. But at the same time, when you look at your typical organization, getting a grant will also increase your revenue, and it does make your organization look more sustainable. And we'll go a little more into that as well, as far as the technicalities of how that enhances your revenue streams and makes your organization more appealable for future funding opportunities. So if even with grants, you don't want to heavily rely on just one source, and I would say that includes for grants, just like major donors and other entities. Grants can be here 1 year and be gone the next year. If you have some sort of arrangement with a government entity, municipality, city, state, you can have one official in the administration 1 year, and then somebody else comes in the next, and they just do away with certain programs. So I believe heavily in sustainability in your fundraising, and that's something we're going to talk about later in the presentation. But more, what I want to really emphasize here is you need to diversify your income stream, and that goes for grants as well. Next slide, please. One of the things I've consulted over the years, but one of the things I did after leaving full-time philanthropy was a promise I made to God. So I said, if because of this great opportunity, increasing income, great opportunity to ascend professionally, that I would offer free consulting to entities that couldn't afford a fundraiser. And some of the things that I've included in some of my advice is grants can relieve the pressure in an entity, especially in smaller organizations. And one of the reasons would be that even if on the lower side of the spectrum of a grant award, that grant that comes in can offset other costs. And that's one of the things I've said to a lot of clients over the years is that, you can have your budget this year, and whether you are counting on a grant or not, that grant comes in, it helps you offset other costs. But then when you're also looking at indirect rate costs, that also can help organizations significantly, especially, as I call it, when you're looking at that revenue that will help you keep the lights on with your organization. Now, with a lot of things, grants do have upsides and downsides. So on the upside of things, one of the things that is I would say one of the top things, if you get the right grant, definitely raises visibility, especially if you take advantage of great PR opportunities when we find out sometimes about some organization, about some of the great things they do, you also see some sort of press release that, this organization got a Robert Johnson Foundation grant or this other stellar grant. So it definitely helps you to raise awareness about the honor of receiving a grant, but also helps you solidify reputation with the nonprofit community. The other one is that once you've gotten a grant, it helps you receive other grants as well. Because one of the first things that organizations look for grant makers is your history. Now, granted, it is a challenge that if you're in a new organization, how do you start? It's kind of like what comes first, chicken and the egg. But it's something that you just have to keep on trying. But once you get the first one, it does establish a history. But at the same time, when you look at downsides, one of the things I do warn people about is that if you don't do your due diligence once you receive the grant, it can also give you a bad reputation as a grant steward. Next slide. So depending on who you're dealing with, and I can tell you that I've had a handful of grants that were sometimes not worth the money that came in. So I'll give an example. So there were two $50,000 grants in the same entity, and the reporting during the award, because there's a stipulation in the grant award contract that there was flexibility on how the entity that gave the award can change the stipulations, and they changed the stipulations to include more intense reporting. So because of the amount of the grant and the manpower that we had and the reporting and what they wanted to report, it was intense. So including the post-award part of it, grants can take a lot of time. Sometimes when you're looking at the pre-award phase, when you're preparing the application. So that's why we're going to go into some other factors about the grants, corporation, foundation, government grants, because when you're looking at what you need to prepare, you want to make sure that you're spending your time wisely, you're being strategic, because if you're investing a lot of time and you're not really aligning the opportunities, you're doing a lot of work for nothing. Another thing that you also have to consider, like I said before, grants are meant for it to be kind of like a short-term purpose. It's kind of like a shot in the arm coming out of COVID. Maybe hopefully it's not too soon, but it's kind of like a vaccine. You want to use that as either as a startup, capacity building, or to strengthen something. And I'll go into this as well later on when you're looking at best practices for grants. There are also ethical implications as well when you're looking when you look at a grant as more of a longer term purpose, and then some of this funding goes away, and what happens then? Next slide, please. You also have to understand the types of funders that are out there. So a lot of the funders require different mechanisms when you apply, and the processes can be a little different. When you're looking at, for example, for starters, private family foundations, they're usually more aligned with some sort of vision, with some sort of value, whether it be because of a personal life-changing event, a loss of a family member, a special cause. So it does take an alignment of your mission and values with these entities. Next slide. And then you're looking at also corporate foundations, and this I also would like to include corporations. When you're looking at corporate entities and foundations, there is, I don't want to say something that's really contradictory here, because before I said that grants are you should be looked at as more of a short-term goal or as a mechanism to help support some of your programming. But if you do things right, when you're looking at certain corporations, foundations, you could look at longer-term partnerships that can help build your sustainability model, and I'll touch on that further on. And then you look at public foundations, community foundations. We have them here in DC, where I've done most of my career. When there's a public-private partnership, where you have some sort of a charity status. Most of these entities represent some sort of public social interest to address something in the community. And you usually have sometimes partnerships with venture funds that address, maternal health or some other social cause, like in my case, being mostly working in the healthcare field, looking at issues such as the social determinants of health that help advance the health status of the community. Next slide. And then we come to government funding, which is, I would say that over the years, it has at least the process of applying for federal grants. I would like to say, and other people might contradict me, but I would say that the process has improved a bit, and very similar to a lot of other entities, be it foundation or corporations. They've gravitated over, from paper applications, very cumbersome processes, to streamline online processes. And the last change that the Fed had for these type of application processes, I was quite impressed. I just the first thing out of my mouth was, "Wow, is that it?" But still, I think that it does require some sort of training, good training, so that you do these properly, because they are very specific, and they do require these type of grants, especially once you're awarded. They do require quite a bit of paperwork and reporting, and then if you're not compliant, then you get downgraded as an applicant, and that makes it harder for you to accept funding. The other thing also is that government entities, agencies will hold you accountable if you're not delivering on what you said you're going to deliver, and that money can go away before you expect it, and you don't want to be in that situation as well. Next slide. So what you need to know about the grant. So going from the discussion we had, parameters are very important to know, and you do have to do your homework for that. Let's see what the next ones are. So when you're looking at grants, a lot of folks I've dealt with over the years, they sometimes act like grants are like free money. You get the grants, and we have certain grants from the municipality, and it just sometimes makes me cringe even today, as I'm dealing with certain entities in the community through my board work. And I just feel like saying, no, these things, there's more to it than what you expect. So these funds are clearly, restricted, and a lot of these rules, these scopes are described in applications. So it's very important that, you and your team are able to have the preliminary work and learn about these funding mechanisms even beforehand, before even the announcements are possible. Something I'm going to talk about later in this presentation about research as well. But when you're looking at these opportunities, you really need to know what you have in line, where you want to go, and instead of reacting to the opportunities, you already have to know and have in place your goals. You have to know that you have a staff in place, your outline activities, your outcomes, the goal, even the budget. So grants can come in different forms as far as what they support. You have your typical general operating grants, and even these can even come with a requirement that only so much can go to personnel. So again, it's something you have to take with a lot of precaution, and not to automatically assume that you're going to be pursuing a grant program and thinking that you're going to be taking care of your HR problems. You should see grants, again, as a shot in the arm, as a booster shot. That was actually the word I was looking for. They're really boosters to help supplement some of your operating expenditures. So you might want to say, oh, well, I'm going to, look at using those grants to maybe shore up 50% of my HR costs, because they're going to be involved in implementing this. And, definitely it will help you offset those HR costs. But it definitely, you want to make sure that you are very conscious about working your budget in a way to include those administrative costs as well. And if you're not very well familiar with that, I would say, definitely practice somebody who's knowledgeable about that, because certain entities do allow for a certain percentage of administrative costs. what I usually advise people I work with is that unless you have, especially when you're dealing with the government, unless you have a negotiated indirect rate agreement, usually you want to come in either at 10% or align your administrative costs with a best practice or an entity that's very well known, and see where they cap it at, because at some point entities start to cap these because people were starting to charge up to 30%, 25, 30% or more for these indirect costs. With the federal government, I think if I remember correctly, you're only allowed up to 10%. Anything above 10%, you have to have a negotiated rate with the feds, and that's a good expenditure as well, to hire a CPA or a law firm that knows how to review those. But aside from the 10%, what I would also advise folks, like for example, we look at entities like Robert Johnson Foundation. If I remember last time I saw, I think they cap it at like 12 or 15. And then at least you can justify that with an entity saying we're capping our indirect at an industry standard viewed by the Robert Johnson Foundation. And this is quite a rarity here, but there are, if you look at some of the search engines that are out there, there are a couple out there for certain trusts. So certain entities do allow opportunities for capital funding if it does align with their mission. So let's say, for example, that there was some sort of life-changing event, healthcare wise, with a family, and so if you're trying to, let's say renovate a hospital wing or something that, that the mechanism will allow for that. But over my 15 years that I was working in hardcore grant development, these are very rare. But at the same time, if you do have a capital project, don't give up. I would say still do the research or work with an entity that can help you connect with the right entity that is interested in providing this type of funding. But one thing I would like to add is that a lot of these entities, they like to come in at the end. They like either to have some sort of naming right, but don't expect them to come in the beginning. They usually like to want to see first that a good 70%. Or at least over 50% of the funding is already on hand from other donors. And then we have research grants, mostly aligned with health entities, but then academic entities, but also other private nonprofits that have a certain interest in a certain, certain area. I hate to use this example, but it's clearly a sign of the times, unfortunately, that we're dealing with. Let's say, for example, gun violence. There could be a nonprofit out there that wants to do research on unintentional, unintentional deaths, incidences, gun violence, domestic violence. So then they would apply for one of these grants. One of the things that for you to know that's quite interesting that some people don't know unless they work in the field is that if you're looking at a certain mechanism such as the NIH grants, usually get the money. Let's say if the grant ceiling is 500,000, you're allowed to write in for indirect costs, and that's above the award. Right? It's always that versus other entities where if you're writing a grant and the max is 500,000, you write 500,000. You got to write that indirect rate cost in there. Have to be part of that. You can't go above that ceiling, but certain federal agencies do for research grants to allow you to write the indirect rate in addition to the max. And that's why you see a lot of fervor from entities going after these grants. And then you have matching grants. I call these the oh no grants because when you have grant professionals, people pursuing these type of funding opportunities, and they see it's a matching grant. Oh, grant matching. Oh no. But it is very, these grants are very useful for entities that do have some money on hand that they have fundraised, and let's say they just need the other 50%, or entities that have some sort of sustaining revenue stream for something that they want to do, but they just need something to kind of cap off their fundraising needs. So I personally always like looking at some of these the matching grants because it definitely was kind of like that wrap up, that nice capping off, the icing on the top, and help you finish off something that you needed. And then you have the in-kind grants. I saw a lot of these from CDC back when I used to work with the health department, and also working with some of the community groups over the years, working with minority health initiatives. And even though that that they did not have necessarily a dollar or revenue amount to them, and we all know as philanthropy professionals that really a lot of what we do is are related to metrics and attainment. But depending on who you work for, some entity will say, okay, let's try to quantify the monetary value of this so we can claim it one way or another. But when you're looking at the true value of this, to have some of the technical support from some of the programs I've seen, they're very, very valuable, especially when you're looking at some of these programs that help you increase your capacity and how to better function as an entity and improve the services that you provide your constituency. Now, how to find these grants? Now, I got to tell you that I've advised a couple of nonprofits over the past year, and it always comes down to how to use your time wisely and to find some of these opportunities. And if you go back some years before the search engines, I don't know how I remember years where I'd spend I had to devote a good time of the day to really look for opportunities, and then took going to different websites. And over the years, you start with Google, and then you look at grants.gov, and then there are different entities out there. But all this has evolved definitely over the years. I think that there are great newsletters out there that aggregate opportunities as well. Problem there is some, they're not capturing everything. But I would say that the bottom line is that sometimes you just have to spend a little money in this. So that would say this. I'm not going to serve as a spokesperson or a pitch person for any particular engine out there, but I would say that there are three ones out there. One, I think, favored by most. I think there are great reviews out there that are fairly accurate. But imagine just being able just to go to one spot and type in your key terms, and then using the filter to kind of zero in on what you need. Grants.gov, one of the engines does capture government opportunities, but I think it's always better if you go directly to grants.gov, and then you're doing your own research on that engine. And I think that just is a little better. But I think you need to, before you even start to go to the search engines, one of the first things you need to do is make sure you know what the budget is. Know what is it that you need, because if you look at a certain opportunity and either they're not, the budget line is not enough, then I've learned over the years that you don't want to have a budget that's too little, because then you're not going to have what you need to actually be successful. But at the same time, you don't want to do something that just for the sake of going for something larger, but then you don't use all your money. And then that looks bad too, because then you have to return money, and that's something that these entities don't want you to do. So you want to make sure that you know what is it that you're going to need that's necessary to your organization to do the work that you need to do the work that you're proposing to do. Next slide, please. So one of the things that are important during your research is finding the grants, finding the opportunities, finding the entities, the grant makers that their values, their areas of interest matches the needs of your organization, because you're not going to have that connection. You're just going to be, remember, when you're applying for these opportunities, in many cases, you're just another packet to them. And sometimes they're going through these applications and they look at something. If it just doesn't look right, even for the first few cover page, they set it aside, and they're only going to start looking for key terms that catch their eyes. And then they're going to set aside the ones that they really like, but then they're going to say, okay, we can maybe look at a couple more. And then they go to the next pile they set aside, and then you got the recycling bin. So you want something that really tries to align. One of the first things you want to do is start with your own community, because there's that first level of alignment. Your local community, a lot of these entities, that's what they're there for. They're there to impact their local community. So start there, and then once you start to, once you have those local partnerships starting to develop, then you can start looking at other entities that are outside your city. Those are a little more challenging because even though, let's say, they may have a national scope or a scope that aligns with some of the values or impacts you want to have in your community, you're still part of the continent away. So there's not that connection. So you want to make sure that you're able to make those emotional and value connections with a funder that's outside your community. Another thing is looking at grant criteria. I've seen people over the years that they see grant, they see money, they see something that, oh, this aligns with what we want to do. But grant criteria, you have to take those very seriously, and you have to take the time to read things. I've worked with people that have said pretty much, I found them, let's go for it. and I'd like to take people's word for it sometimes, just, okay, let's do this and start working. But if you don't do your homework, you're going to spend a lot of time, valuable time, and waste money, waste time. It only took a couple of times for me to say, oh, great, let's go for it. And then as I'm reading through things very carefully, then there's something that comes up in the criteria that does not match, but you already spent time talking about what you're going to do and everything else. So that's very important. When you start this process, you want to make sure that, you're finding the right grant for your organization and for the program that you want, for the goals, the impact you want to do. Because you're just wasting time, you're wasting money, you're wasting personnel that can do something else that's more important for your charity. Another thing that takes, and this I'll tell you from experience, early in my career, every once in a while, when we're all busy, we're getting pulled in different directions. How many times have we been in a situation when you're ready to submit a grant or it's a tight turnaround because this popped up as a great opportunity, been waiting for this, and then you're pretty much down to the wire, and you still have to collect documents, and then there's a mad scramble to get documents. So I would say that is very important, even if you're not, let's say right now you're not grant ready, or let's say there's no opportunity. If this is something that you want to do, if you want to launch a program, start collecting key documents right now, and have a calendar, put a calendar on your corkboard that that every year in January, or every year whenever something turns around, so if your fiscal year ends in June 30, whenever it is that these documents have to be revised or updated, these licenses, registration, make sure that you have them on your file ready to go, because that's one of the things that you want. Sometimes documents like these, they could take some days to get, and you don't want to be down to the wire for something you submit and you're doing a mad scramble, or even miss a deadline. But some of these grant scores, they become more sophisticated over the years, and what they're asking for is proof that you are a credible entity, that you have a track history. They want to see your 990s, your incorporation papers. They want to make sure that they're going to be a good investment for their funds. Next slide. Some other things that I would, I'm including organization's history and mission because there are a lot of grant opportunities and applications that I've seen that your organization's history and mission is actually a document that you submit aside separately from the document. Even when you look at some of the regulatory documents and applications I have to submit in my current position, for a certificate of need, and the instruction in the application says, upload a document that describes your organization's capacity and history and describes your system, what have you. Sometimes it is a separate document. So these are the things that you want to have ready. I would say the industry calls a lot of this your boilerplate language, but you don't want to be complacent just because you have these on file that your work's done. I mean, when you're looking at information like target population and needs, those can change every year. So you want to make sure that you're adding some of these things, especially when you're looking at history's mission, history. There could have been an achievement that happened last year. Just make sure that these documents are always being managed properly. Especially with the major accomplishments, you don't want to miss something like that from including something that can make you really look like a superstar. Some of the things that you also should have and be honest about. But I think that the grantors like to know is challenges, lessons, because they want to make sure that they're not dealing with somebody that just thinks they're perfect and not learned their lessons. You don't want to be surprised when you need some of this information. So I think this is a good template. You're more than welcome to use this and just as a checklist. We have these things and just have them ready to go so that in case a future application requires it, you have it ready to use. Now, one of the things that you also should have for your programs, and any good program should have, is an evaluation process. I recently had a conversation with one of the people that deal with funds disbursement for the state of Virginia for Governor Youngkin, and we were working with a community member, and the community member was under the impression that just doing a simple survey of the people that he was providing service to was going to be enough. That I would say the days where you were able to say, "Oh, we did a pre and post test," or the days that I would say even with the question of sustainability, how are you going to keep this grant alive after it's gone? Oh, we're going to use our fundraising staff to continue funding after this. Oh, okay, perfect. Those days are gone. So when you're looking at an evaluation process, you really have to be precise about it. You want to show not only what kind of evaluation tool that you're going to use, but is it a best practice tool? I mean, is it based on science? And what is the impact? Because these funders, they want to know what the return on their investment is going to be. Is it going to be some sort of quantitative or qualitative assessment that you're going to do? And what is it? What was the change? What was the impact on the money that you received? One of the things that also you're going to need for your applications and document staff ready, and people are always scrambling for these at the last minute. So have those resumes, those bios, those CVs, something that's going to make the people that are involved in the program implementation of the grant. It's going to convince the funder that you have a superstar team and the right people to implement. They're going to be responsible and know what they're doing. And then obviously you want to make sure that you have your proper due diligence with your registrations, your incorporations, and your annual report, because they do want to know how you use your money on an annual basis. Financial information is very important. Audit financials, they usually try to see that you have the most fiscal year audited for larger entities. You're usually running a year behind, so try to have some sort of acceptable acceptable format for that. Your 990s, any type of tax information, always have those ready to go. And if you have any questions, I've always been a big fan of calling the program officer. That's what they're there for. They're in the business to give money, and they're also in the business to answer questions. And then, like I just mentioned before, have some sort of sustainability plan, because the entities, they want to know that if they're going to be providing some sort of service to the community, that it's just not going to go away the next year just because the funding goes away. I would say my first lesson that I learned was when I was doing my master's of public health, and one of the things I had to do was actually to get a grant and do a grant in the community, and I thought I would have an easy opportunity because I knew somebody in the clinic, a clinical director, and I got he just yelled at me. He's like, "How dare you? This is really unethical," and I just didn't know where this was coming from. But his frustration was that during those years in the early 2000s was that people would go and say, "I want to do this grant here because we want to do obviously people want to get paid, they have some kind of service, but it's very unethical to say, oh, we're just going to implement this, we got this money, this is what we're doing, but then it's gone." So what happens to the people that are receiving the service? They're in tune with the service, but then the service goes away because the money goes away. There is no plan for sustainability. So you want to make sure that you have that. You're going to know, and you might get away with, oh, we're going to start. This is important. We're going to commit our fundraising resources. It might work with some entities, but nowadays they've become more sophisticated, and they want to know. They want to see some kind of concrete evidence that you're going to be able to pick up the tab after this grant goes away. Readiness. And Scott, I think we're running long because I didn't think I was gonna be so long-winded. How are we with time? Should I just try to speed through some of these things?
I would.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I'm gonna try and just, because this is a bad habit because I did lecture at Mason and Marymount for some years, so I apologize for being long-winded. So, okay, so one of the things you have to make sure is before you even go to applying for a grant, you want to make sure you're ready. And I'm not saying with documents, you want to make sure you have your concept ready, your tools. You want to make sure that you're not chasing a grant to say, oh, here's a grant. Oh, what can we do? You need to know what you want to do. You want to have that goals. You want to have the visions. You want to have what you want to, what the impact, and that's how you should really pursue grant opportunities. Next step. Next slide. Next slide. Important to do your research even before. Pay attention to guidelines. As far as how the mechanisms work. Next slide, because at some point I want to get to some of the important things. I've always believed that by creating a list and a calendar and what we call an industry is your pipeline, that's the thing you want to really work on. Do your research, do your homework, invest time in creating a strong pipeline, a strong and sustainable pipeline. So, but not only opportunities that you know, but possible opportunities. So when you do your research, also look at entities that even if those grant opportunities, those grant cycles that pass, put them on your calendar and then have some time where you reach out to these potential partners and find out more about the requirements that they're looking for, because then at some point you're going to end up on their radar and then be able to apply. Next slide. I said about reaching out, and I'll say one thing about reaching out to individuals, create those relationships before you even need that money. And even if they're not in the grant cycle, get in touch with them. Don't ask for money. Just say that you're there to learn more about them, and then you want to educate them about what you're doing, and don't ask for the money. Just say at some point we want to get on your radar. And I found that over the years that's a very successful strategy, because what happens is like, oh, let's keep in touch. Send me information, and as you send them information about what you're doing, guess what? You're going to get that call saying, we have this grant cycle coming up. We think that this is going to be a good match for you because you kept them in the process, in the information process. Next slide. This is very technical, but when you're what I'll say about crafting your proposal is, and you can jump ahead a couple of slides, Scott. One of the things that I would say about putting the proposals together is you want to make sure that you're following the instructions. If they say one page for this, do one page and no more. If it's double space, make sure you double space. And one thing that you want to make sure that you're very careful about are the word counts, because more and more nowadays, a lot of these applications are online and you have to actually cut and paste into the field. And if you're doing this last time at the last minute, and all of a sudden you realize it's characters and not words, you're gonna be spending a lot of time trying to retool that content to fit those fields. So you want to make sure that you understand what they want. Next one. Next one. We're going to make these slides available, correct, Scott?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. One of the things also I want to say that with the technicalities of the grant proposal, what I learned and what I think was a successful model is that when you're looking at a lot of these information that you're putting together with typing all this information up, what you're really doing is you're storytelling. And you want to be able to do that not only on paper, but also by reaching out to these individuals before and also after, because when you're doing it before, you're trying to cultivate these potential donors. And then afterwards, you try and do some stewardship after receiving the money. You can go to the next slide. So I would say that as you go into the best practices, Scott, storytelling, I think, is something that everybody needs to work on doing. And I think it's kind of like a marrying of two disciplines, because one of the things when I first started out in grant development, I found it to be very technical and cold. No, I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's what it was. It was very highly technical. But then I received training as a grant, as a gift officer or major gift officer. But then I realized, what about bringing combining these two, and you ended up being in this area of kind of the foundation and corporation relations thing. Instead of just applying for grants, let's just start treating some of these entities such as if they were individual donors. you add an enhancement, because what happens is you add these other factors with the high quality cultivation and then the stewardship, and then you're able to give a face to your application, to your project, so you stand out from all the other applications. Next slide. Next slide. I already covered this. So even if entities don't are not in the current mode of accepting applications, still reach out to them. I think it's very important to have connections with them. Next slide. Next slide. I already said this. All right, so this is coming to the end of the presentation. Next slide. My pet peeve has always been sustainability, and one of the things I learned over the years that has helped me really sustain some key programs that I've known about programs that have, to the tune of even to $1 million, have dependent on grants. And then at some point I find out that money is going away. And you're looking at, services for very vulnerable populations. That is very unethical. So one of the things I really want to encourage is to build a strong, sustainable pipeline. Be strategic, not tactical. And one of the best models I've seen and that I learned over the years was one NCLR/Unidos US, as they're known now. By coincidence, I met one of their first philanthropy officer, and this person said, by the way, do you think we actually got all of our money from the community? He's like, no, we got it through corporations. And she told me about how they looked at corporations as individual donors and created a corporate council. So let's say if you had this base, your fundamental operating needs, imagine being able to depend on entities like the Coca-Colas out there. They're part of your corporate council board, and each one's giving you $10,000. And you say, you know what, every year we can count on this. And instead of having a $100,000 grant that goes away, and for whatever reason you have a Coca-Cola that goes away, you only have to worry about plugging in those 10 grand. And then United Way took a similar model with corporate donations or corporate councils, corporate support, and made it sustainable. But then they took an extra step. Now, granted, this is not the topic of today's webinar, but the extra step was saying, how can we engage those corporations that are sustaining us and engage their employees to be volunteers? Because then guess what? Those volunteers got buy-in into the organization and became donors. So I want to leave it at, capping off, learn to be a great storyteller, as an advocate for your organization, and really prioritize, creating a good model stewardship program, because once you have them, the job is to keep them on. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, that's great, Francisco. And anyone online, feel free to use the Q&A tab to submit something in. But Francisco, I've got one observation from your comments, and it seems to me you closed with it quite strongly, and that is the concept of treating these relationships as just that. In other words, if there's a foundation that only accepts or only requests proposals, try to do the best you can to identify someone on that board or someone who's got a relationship with somebody on that board to gain an introduction to see if there's a pathway. And then secondly, for those that invite proposals, I gather you're suggesting that what we do is we meet with program officers and others throughout the year and just sort of talk about what their priorities are and ascertain whether or not there's any overlap or match with the things that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. When I was working with you at the Hospital Center Foundation, and Caperidge was a hard door to knock on. And I was not even involved with that as a connection. The challenge was that they were knocking on the door and it's like, no, we're not doing anything, this year. Sorry, it doesn't align. This is not, and then at some point when I kind of, during move management, I said, well, you guys are, not asking the right questions. So I got looped in and I just typed up, our initial kind of like a brief case statement to kind of, just as a lead behind. And the magic question was, let's have a conversation. We think there's alignment here, but we understand. So what we want to know is, we get it that you're definitely probably, committed this year, and you're probably committed the next year as well. What can we do to get on your radar? And that was, we're not asking for money now or for next year, but what can we do to get on your radar? And that's the answer we got. They said, well, yeah, we can't do it this year. We already committed for next year. But if we keep in touch, we could probably do something that third year. But in the meantime, kind of keep us abreast with everything you're doing. And guess what? That third year, we got the Cafritz Award for the EP Lab, which has their name on it.
That's outstanding. Now, what's the dissimilarity with government activity? The thing that I heard you say was, well, people might get elected out of office and a replacement comes in, and that could, upset the apple cart. How frequent is that kind of interruption? Or once a government agency gets involved in something, do they tend to keep with it through the term?
Yeah, well, there was an organization, a social service organization in Virginia that was very well known for Hispanics, and they had agreements with local municipalities that every year they can expect the same amount of money to support their programs. But all it took was, for one, director to come in who was not able to manage those relationships. And then what happened was a total change in leadership, and all of a sudden that they lost personnel, they lost a significant part of their budget, and a lot of those valuable programs were not. So they did not go back to the same level of visibility. So that's something you have to kind of make sure that you continue those relationships with entities, not only the elected officials that turn over, but the established personnel, so that even though somebody comes through that's new, you keep that relationship going. So they say, this may not necessarily be a priority for you, for the person that comes through, but this is something that is an established program for our constituency. That's the value that need to continue. So, even as little things that as press releases where you put people's logos on the government agency, you thank them. You want to make sure that, again, it's very tailored, high quality stewardship. And if that's not done, you run in danger of losing that grant funding as a sustainable source. And again, I don't want to look at grants as a sustainable source, but you want to be able to look at creating a relationship that through those grants, you can get those corporate sponsorship, foundation commitments, the longer term relationships, and you can actually get that through government as well, because even though they do have certain government funding grant mechanisms, you can always find a way so that there's a grant program that's recurring that helps sustain you, that you're almost in some ways, not a guaranteed, but it's almost a strong chance that you'll get that funding the next cycle.
So this is more of a personal question. You may stand out as the lone contrarian in the firm, because we look at the Giving USA data and say 72% of the money comes from individuals living and dead, and half of the foundation money comes in through family foundations. Only 6% comes in the door through corporate work. And so you're here, I think, to tell us that we ought not to overlook this. we ought to spend good time.
It's the future, yeah, because what you're looking at is even when you have economic hard times, people are going to start prioritizing as far as their individual giving, and sometimes they prioritize with church being first, and maybe their alma mater or for something that's children related. So I think that you should still focus on that, but I think that is important because individual giving is very important. But I think that the future is also in looking at something that's sustainable, partnership with corporations, because now more than ever, especially with ESG, they're becoming more socially conscious as far as their imaging and their branding. So there's a huge opportunity that you don't want to lose out. And also, I'll throw this in there, even though it's not the topic of today, but planned giving, because you're looking at a lot of individuals who may not be able to write that $100,000 check. But guess what? They know that if they, when they pass away, they have a policy that they can turn over. And I think honestly, between corporations and planned giving, that's the future of sustainability for the nonprofit sector in the years to come.
Well, Francisco, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you part of the team and bring all this real world knowledge to the table. And for those of you that have spent an hour with us this afternoon, we thank you. And please note that with a certain reasonable amount of time, we'll have a copy of this up on the website and the resource page And we'll have an edited version of the screen show as well. So thank you, and do think of us anytime you have an interest or a question about anything related to philanthropy. It's our passion, it's our mission to help. So have a great day. Bye-bye.